Welcome everyone to another episode of Reimagining Cyber. Rob here, and this week, it's my pleasure to welcome a new friend of mine, Tony Gonzalez, the principal at Inner Vision Services LLC, a cyber advisory organization. He's also formerly the CISO for QBE North America, and prior to that, he was the director of IT risk at Prudential Financial. Tony has great experience across multiple verticals, ranging from obviously financial services, as you heard, insurance, pharmaceutical, biotech, consumer goods, and chemical manufacturing. So I'm really excited to get into our conversation here with you today, Tony. But before I do, just kind of give everyone a little quick intro. I mentioned new friend. So I had the opportunity probably about a month and a half or so ago to be on a panel in New York City with Tony. And I think we had some really great discussion amongst us, but also in the audience and then thereafter. But just getting to know Tony, and again, his experiences, it was obvious. I said, Tony, I'd love to have you join us. So here we are today, Tony. I'm so happy we're going to be able to have this conversation, be very focused on a topic that we've touched upon in other episodes, but touched upon as part of the conversation on other topics. So having this kind of focus is going to be very exciting. So again, thank you for being here with us today, Tony.
No, it's really a pleasure, Rob.
Tony, I guess before we jump in, one of the things that would be really helpful is hearing your kind of definition and maybe summarization of what third-party risk management is all about in the lens of, the cyber or digital kind of aspects of things, just for the audience. So if you don't mind, just let's kind of start off and set the stage about that topic of third-party risk management.
Sure. So, third party has been a evolution in its own as far as what it means. And from my perspective, it really is looking at all of the participants, partners, vendors, et cetera, that are in your ecosystem that are basically helping you provide services or helping you define your product in the business that you're in. It's come a long way over the years as far as it used to be, where third-party risk was looked at as a very transactional type of process, right? A lot of questionnaires and forms flying around, but it was, kind of more the check the box than being part of an overall process and being part of an overall program that you need in order to address your total risk posture in an organization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think you hit it on the nose, that it has historically been much more of a checkbox approach, which is a bit of a shame, right? Because you kind of miss the opportunity of how that can help you evolve your cyber program and just take it again forward. So it's kind of, Tony, like the topic of multiple different types of compliance, and regulatory requirements that organizations have had in the past, where, PCI, I always talk about as an example. Historically, people looked at it as, okay, we're going to do a pre-audit or a pre-assessment and kind of get some visibility to where our problem areas are across PCI that we have to obviously get better locked in and make some adjustments. Mm-hmm. But when the actual QSA comes in to do the actual assessment, and we want the results that we need to have accomplished, and it's kind of that, great, we just accomplished it. Now we'll see you next year. And then we just kind of play a game of whack-a-mole all along the way. So it's again, the third party kind of risk topic absolutely has continued to evolve. And one of the things you and I were chatting about previously was you were extending it to, kind of how we dig in deeper, and it evolves into fourth, fifth, sixth parties in some cases and beyond. So it'd be great to kind of get your thoughts on just what you're seeing in that space and that, the impact it's taken downstream as well.
Yeah. So, again, it used to be where you looked at it and you said, these are third parties that I engage. I find out something about them. And then, like you said, you put it on the shelf. But where it's evolving to is then, what are they doing? Who are they working with that are providing their services? What information of yours and what data of yours are they sharing with other folks in order to provide their services? And that's where this third, fourth party, I've even heard of fifth party issues going. I think that's maybe pushing it too far away from the center of what the issue is. But I've had personal experience where there were fourth party breaches that wound up impacting the organizations that I was working for. So really understanding the concept of what the services are that those third parties are providing, who's going to be providing those services, and who do they partner with That's a very big step that I think everybody needs to go toward in order to effectively manage this, like I said, this ecosystem that you're using to provide services to you.
And I think, as you said, it is interesting, right? Maybe the fourth party is kind of where we all would like the line to be drawn. And as you mentioned, right, it's gone to the extremes in some cases, fifth and 6th. But I think it's also kind of a matter of time, right? It's this maturation of multiple organizations just doing better overall, getting used to filling out these security questionnaires, right? Because it is going further downstream to them as well. So as time evolves, I think it's going to get stronger for better security controls being put in place, again, downstream, that'll help us, organization, like, with your time back at QBE, your time back at Prudential. Do you really want to have to go to fourth, fifth layer? If you can stay at the third party relationships, and you have the confidence that, again, they're doing the right things beyond, that's where we ultimately would all like to be. Wouldn't that be the case more so?
Yeah, it would be, but you have to be a realist about it. So some of the, depending on the size of your organization, one of the companies I worked with and ran security and risk for was Pfizer. When you start looking at a company that's, in 40 plus countries, and at the time I was there was 150,000 employees, the number of vendors that we had were just astronomical that we were doing business with, especially when you take in what's your business model, right? If you're working with contract researchers and all sorts of different people that are providing multiple types of services for your organization that your organization is capitalizing on in order to drive product and build revenue, that becomes a monumental task to be able to go after that and to do it in a real holistic and meaningful fashion. And you brought up the point of PCI, and PCI is a great example of where in the very early stages when people started paying attention to PCI, it was like, okay, I'm not going to process any transactions internally. I'll give it to a third party, and now it's their problem. Well, it's never their problem. It's always yours.
That's right.
The one thing you can't basically outsource is responsibility and accountability, right? That's the rule number one. That's the 101 rule when it comes to anything you do with third parties, whether they're vendors, service providers, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I laugh at that because it's applicable in that scenario. And I just think back, different topic, but on the whole relationship of, an organization with their cloud service provider and not realizing the reality of, no, it truly is a shared responsibilities model matrix that you need to ensure that it's still your data, in some cases, your applications. So yeah, you're still absolutely on a hook. It's not as easy as being able to just sign on, a contract and assume all the risk is completely pushed off to someone else altogether.
Yeah, and over the years, people have always it's always been related to it. At one time, we used to call them disruptive technologies, right? Now, when you think about that, now on everybody's mind is AI. Before that, it was cloud. Before that, it was the internet. Before that, it was the telephone. You could go through these different evolutionary technologies that have basically changed the way people do business, changed the way the business models are put together in organizations, started new businesses and classifications of businesses in its entirety, right? And they all bring certain risk posture issues along with them that need to be addressed, so that when you start looking at third parties providing those services, you need to make sure that you're at least kicking the tires to a certain degree to make sure that those service providers are taking security and risk. They're taking it serious. Yeah.
Let's kind of double click a little bit deeper into the regulatory side of things, because they are major drivers, and especially when it comes to third party risk, more so now than ever before. And there's historically been some tie-ins to things, from PCI, from HIPAA, that do call out third party. But you're seeing major pressure coming from, the SEC with the cyber rule. NYDFS is another example where there's, there's some strong penalties sitting behind getting your ducks in a row and making sure your third party risk management program is not only established, but moving in the right direction and aligned to specific requirements called out by those different regulatory bodies, those different standards that are out there. I guess when you look at that, do you see it really helping? And is it, helping move the needle in the right direction to show some more maturity in these areas of strengthening the third party relationships and better understanding of, the risks from a cyber lens on them?
I think you always have to look at regulations instead of looking at them as being a weight on your back. You have to take a look at them and say, what can the regulations actually help us do to actually drive our program to be better, and also to ensure that we're doing things in an efficient manner, right? So, for instance, you mentioned NYDFS 500, right? NYDFS 500 a couple of years back, when they started talking about third-party risk management, and then they went even further to say that not only covered vendors and suppliers, it also covered brokers and agents in the insurance industry and other industries, right?
Right.
Now, working in the insurance industry, what that meant was my program had to go from dealing with 400 to 500 vendors to dealing with an additional 10,000 brokers and agents that were in the pipeline, right? So how do you basically look at what really matters? How do you prioritize those things? How do you focus on the people that are basically going to bring higher risk to your organization, right? And it's really about understanding what the actual risks are related to those specific vendors and brokers and third parties, right? Are you sharing data with them? Are they collecting data from the actual the people that they're selling insurance to, and they're just passing arbitrage over to you in a fund transfer, and they're keeping all the data and responsibility? Or are they actually using your system so that now all that responsibility is on you, and they have access to those systems, and you need to basically pay more attention to what they're doing in their local brokerages, right?
Right.
There's all those kinds of things and questions that have to be asked to understand what's the specific business model, what's the risk that comes along with that business model, and then what do you need to do to put some sort of controls or extend your controls in order to basically feel that they're covering those issues as you go along.
Yeah. No, and that can only imagine, how extensive that is, as you mentioned, especially in your past experiences and looking at it from the insurance and then pushing it all the way down to the agent level. That is quite an explosion of the program in which you have to take into account.
Yeah.
We've talked to this point a lot about the specifics as it relates to, the impacts, but let's talk about, so as a listener of our podcast, what would we give them as guiding principles relative to how you go about prioritizing, kind of the approaches you should take to assessing third-party vendors? And it's tough, right? Because I know, it depends on your business. You've been talking about it. What is your business desired outcomes? How do you prioritize those things? I guess, is there any recommendations that you have that helps make it easier for them to understand how to best prioritize it for their own organizations, and maybe even any resources you would point them towards?
I think number one, you really need to take a look and say, what is the person doing for us, right? Like I said, if they're basically, collecting data, transferring data, they're using internal data of ours, what's the risk profile of the service that's being offered by them, or the services we're providing to them, because it could go both ways, right?
Yeah.
That should give you an idea to basically put together something in your program that's going to risk rank those people to say, these are the riskiest situations and scenarios that we have with those particular people. And we need to basically put top priority on those. Those top priority could be that we're going to evaluate them even more quickly. We're going to require some sort of formal documentation from them that they've gone through audits, or they have a SOC 2, or whatever the company feels comfortable having, that you're taking a certain level of responsibility of those third parties to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and you can feel comfortable that risk is being mitigated by their processes and how they're doing business, right? And then the ones that fall lower on the scale, then you can address those and do it. Some people do 1, 2, 3 year evaluations. Some people are using tools that are doing more continual assessment. So whether you're using, the security scorecards and the bit sites of the world that give you some sort of a risk ranking of organizations, that's a more somewhat real-time review of people to see what they're doing and where their exposures may be.
Mhm.
Or if you're doing something that's more with a more detailed GRC tool where it goes,
Yeah.
you're managing how you're doing reviews, you're managing some of that information that's coming in from those other tools, so that you have more of a continual response or continual monitoring of those vendors, especially your most critical ones.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it kind of ties into almost the principles of, mapping it into your risk register as well. So it's,
Another thing I would add too is I've seen
Mhm.
people get into very elaborate surveys and questionnaires,
Yes.
hundreds of questions and pages on top of pages. And let's face it, most people have a big struggle getting other people to respond.
Yeah.
And very few organizations have come to the point where they'll say, well, if you don't respond, we'll stop doing business with you. That's not a sustainable model or a sustainable approach to take, right?
Yeah.
So you really have to try to make it as easy as possible to get the information that you're looking for. So if you can use those automated tools, fine. And if
Mhm.
you need to get certain responses from people, really whittle it down to the things that are going to be most important for you to say that people are doing the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, sitting on the vendor side, we've seen the constant growth of the number of questions coming through. So, back we'd see, dozens of questions. Now, to your point, hundreds of questions are coming through. Of course, it depends on each of the different, end organizations that we're doing business with, but it really is all over the map. And it's difficult at times, of course, to manage and ensure that, we're going through, and it becomes time consuming and kind of getting some of these things out there. So it's better where we can provide, hey, here's kind of, again, SOC 2, here's all the different things that we're doing that you can go back through and pump into your own checklist. And then any gaps, let us address those. So this kind of leads into actually my next question. And I'd like to do this every now and then, which is kind of get you to share, or get the person I'm having on as a guest share their perspectives of kind of where do we go next on this topic? How do we see improvement? So maybe to the topic we just maybe it's efficiency gains that we can actually drive towards, right? So just, I guess, open-ended, right, Tony? What do you think is kind of next to help move this space forward?
I think there's a combination of things that can be done. Obviously, the efficiency, the ease of basically having people report and tie into what's been done to date, streamlining the questionnaires, and maybe it even has to come down to incentives. One thing I know that with all of these things, what hasn't been done is tying it back to being part of doing business, right? So when you're engaging with these third parties and you're signing on for services, you should have in your contract that it's a requirement of doing business that these things are done and they're done within a timely manner. If it's not, then it's just a subjective move that people can actually decide whether or not they want to, right?
Right.
So I think that there needs to be more of that holistic closed loop approach to third party that hasn't been done in the past, that really needs to be done in order to make it effective. That gives people incentive to basically keep the business and
Yeah.
and to also drive more of a partnership in this, right? Because that's really where it has to go, is that when you're bringing on, we used to talk about vendors and third party suppliers as strategic partners.
Mhm.
Well, you have to have open communications with folks that really is like a strategic partnership, not just a follow-up meeting where you talk about, your help desk didn't report the information to us correctly, or you didn't get back to us on time or whatever, but really talk about what you're doing to drive the business and what you need from them in order to drive your business,
Right.
in order to make it an effective partnership with open communication. I see where we haven't done enough as practitioners in that space, where I think that would make things much more viable, and it would make the partnership and arrangement go much more smoothly.
I couldn't agree more. It would actually be the true definition of putting strategic in front of partnership, right? To your point, like that's what really brings us together to actually say we're driving towards the outcomes that you and your business are trying to actually deliver upon. So that's really what connects the
Chris,
dots.
let's face it, what everything we do from a cyber and risk perspective, right? Yeah, we could talk about, we're in the protection business and the detection business and talk about all the technology and all that. But at the end of the day, we're all here to enable our businesses to be successful and grow.
Mm-hmm.
And
100%.
if we're not keeping that at the forefront of the decision making that we're doing, then we're going to start losing our effectiveness with the business.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well said, Tony. And thank you so much for joining us today and helping shed the light more so and focus on our conversation on third-party risk management, kind of setting the base, talking about the ways we're progressing, some thoughts you have. And I guess the thing I really liked is also how you brought it all together at the end. And it's really about the reality of who we're working with at the end partner side of it that's helping them move forward as well. So thanks so much for joining us today, Tony. It's been a pleasure.
Rob, my pleasure. Really had a good time.
Hello, Producer Ben here, and regular listeners will know that this is the point in the show when I flag up previous editions of the podcast to encourage you to explore our back catalogue. So let's step back exactly 1 year to episode 74, called The CISO, Guardian of the Digital Realm. It features various contributors all sharing their thoughts on the evolving role of the Chief Information Security Officer. For example, Param Eftekhari, Executive Vice President of the Cyber Risk Alliance, discussed the transformation of the CISO role into that of a business leader.
I think the ones who are more effective and efficient in their role understand that it's less about them actually implementing the technology and kind of doing the blocking and tackling themselves. They have teams to do that. What's really important for the CISO to do is understand how to navigate the business side of the organization to make sure that the priorities that they have as the head of the security shop get elevated to the business leaders, right? The board, the CFO, the CEO, the president, all the business unit leads within their organization.
That was Param Eftekhari speaking on episode 74, The CISO, Guardian of the Digital Realm. Thanks for listening to Reimagining Cyber. Do leave us a rating and a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. It is hugely appreciated. Goodbye.